Welcome, 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 and thanks for listening. Tonight we're outside of Eugene, Oregon, in a forest with the wonderful Buddhist teacher Justin Michelson. We're discussing his new book called The Dharma of Healing, which has been described as a real innovation in Buddhist practice. And in this episode, I'm reminded of perhaps the myth of the Buddha and the Buddha's awakening next to and connecting to a Bodhi tree. And perhaps that detail of the Buddha connecting with the Bodhi tree or his own inner nature gets lost in our modern culture that is seeking a deeper connection with nature. And Justin's unique approach, I think, gets back to this original essence of Buddhism. It is a Buddhism of a natural connection, compassion, heart-based, a relaxed body attunement, and of course, one that is community-based. But without further ado, I'll turn this over to Professor Pardee and Justin as they share the Dharma of Healing.
It's wonderful to be able to talk with you today. I have to say at the outset that I found your book really, really refreshing. You've somehow managed to write about multiple dimensions of psychological and spiritual experience in relation to meditative practice. And also then you've touched on many things in your book that are deeply personal, as well as, I don't know if you phrase it this way, I don't recall, but you've also talked a lot about what nurtures and encourages spiritual growth. And I think about that in transpersonal terms, not just in a kind of single way. But I hope it's all right with you if I start off today just by reading the first paragraph of the introduction to your book.
Sure.
I found it a very, very interesting first paragraph to a book. So I'd love to be able to share it with people who are listening. You write, "For me, living within this age of crisis has been a great challenge at times. By elementary school, I had learned about the disappearing rainforests and dwindling species. By middle school, I had read about the vast disparities in wealth and the needless poverty around the globe. By high school, I had begun to understand the mechanisms of endless wars, corruption, and oppression that humans impose on one another. Each time I discovered a new aspect of the troubled nature of our world, my heart would sink. It was only in hindsight that I would realize each painful discovery also ripened me, guiding me deeper and deeper into a profound personal exploration, determined to discover the root cause of this suffering and to establish an inner refuge amid the storm." That is such a beautiful, beautiful paragraph. And it tells us from the beginning how long you've had this very receptive, open, compassionate heart. It takes a great deal of strength, I think, to be able to experience those kinds of feelings, the depth of those feelings early on. And clearly, you've managed that beautifully in your life, and your book is really a testament to that. So it was a pleasure to read the first time, and you can be sure that I will read it over and over again. There's a lot in there to be absorbed. But perhaps you could speak a little bit to that, what that journey has been like for you since it began so early in your life.
Yeah, I haven't heard that paragraph in a while. And gosh, my heart, I have this kind of chills, this shivers around just how it continues to be the case, even more so for the generations that are growing up right now. You could say maybe there's also other ways of distracting ourselves now than when I was a kid, but I think that's just an undercurrent, sometimes unspoken, that the younger generations are growing up with right now. It's just like, what is this world I'm growing up into? And for a subset of those folks, maybe just with the right, guidance and teaching, maybe just a few words, that part of them that remembers the possibility of what it could be, somewhere in their bones might awaken, and that's just how it was for me. And the influence that was most prevalent for me before meditation was just being in nature. And we still have these precious reserves of the natural world. And those, to me, are places of waking up and remembering what our relationship with the world could be, as opposed to what the dominant paradigm is. And so spending time in nature is a big thing for me that really cracked me open, and it led me to meditation, or I should say it prepared my heart for meditation. So when I sat down for the first time with my teacher, it was a class for teenagers. I was 15. Rodney Smith is my teacher still to this day. I sat down and I thought, oh, this is just like being a tree. And it just kind of makes sense to me, this authenticity and vulnerability and simplicity of being that is, in my perception, expressed so amazingly in the natural world, and especially with plants and trees. And eventually, a decade or two later, I started a native plant nursery that I still own. So plants and nature have been a really important piece of my journey. But just growing up was sort of one heartbreak after another. And I fortunately found meditation to deal with that. It told me move towards the pain. So I kind of used that as a guide. So in college, I studied environmental studies because I wanted to move towards my biggest heartbreak, which was to watch the natural world be kind of contorted and disturbed. And that's kind of that's the book as well, right? It's like we move towards the pain in ourselves, and it becomes a doorway to awakening if we embrace it deeply enough. So it took me a long time to actually come to kind of appreciate that, because usually we just try to resist what is painful. Obviously, we have a lot of conditioning around that. But when we move in the opposite direction and we activate the heart qualities that are inherent in our nature, then the world today is our teacher. The challenges, the struggles, the tragedies of the world today can be our teacher.
I think that's so true. And to have realized or to have naturally gone in that direction, that's quite something. It's interesting that we haven't, as a culture, we haven't really acknowledged the thing that we should all know so clearly by now, how intricately we're connected with the natural world, how much our lives depend on the life of the natural world. And so it's an interesting thing that we haven't really internalized that the way that you're speaking about. It's really rather strange that we haven't, that we have, some of us have realized it and have taken some steps, but our disregard for the natural world has really gotten a head start on us. And we have a lot of ground yet to make up. So I can understand that. And I think about these younger generations, what it's like for them not really to have had some of the opportunities, for example, that you had or I had or that Mike had when we were younger. The world has really sped up in so many ways, and with it, some of the more destructive features of our being on the planet. That's very true. Yeah. So you were 15, and how closely to that time then did you become involved with a path of meditation?
Yeah, there was a class for teenagers in the local Insight Meditation group in Seattle. And so my mom suggested I go, and I was raised Christian, loosely went to Sunday school and such. But by that age, I was interested in something different. And so I just trying to jump at the opportunity and gathered whatever high school friends I could, and we went to the 6-week class for teens in the summer of whatever it was, 2000.
Oh, that's wonderful. So you actually took friends with you. Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, we still remember that. And not many of them. Let's see, I don't think any of them really continued. But they have my book now, so and I reference it. So
well,
it's kind of fun.
The way you've written your book, I would think that would pull them right back toward it. It's a beautifully written book.
Thank
It's
you.
deeply personal, but one of the more amazing things to me is how you have so internalized so many aspects of Buddhism, of meditation, of your understanding of the natural world. You've done that in a way that allows you to write without jargon, to translate so much of the sort of what are considered sometimes fundamentals in meditative practice, depending on the form of Buddhist meditation you embrace. But some of that can be, again, sort of objectified. And you've managed to write a book from a very personal place without that kind of jargon, which I find amazing. You've actually avoided some of the psychological jargon, not just the spiritual terminology, but you've also done that with the biological side. That's a pretty amazing feat.
Oh, thank
Has
you.
that always come naturally to you, or is that something you were really striving to do to make these things accessible?
I was striving to make something that felt uniquely mine, I would say. So I actually tried not to read a whole lot of other things while I was creating this book. The book was really a culmination of 20, 25 years of practice that when I was 35, I had a kind of a bigger spiritual experience where a lot of things just made sense to me. Sort of the first half of my practice was really engaged in Buddhism. The second half of my practice was more engaged in emotional healing. And I didn't understand how those two worlds for a while coexisted. And there's a lot of paradoxes on the path, and that's one of them, is the psychological and spiritual modalities sometimes feel at odds with one another. And it all kind of clicked. And at least the table of contents of the book kind of came to me all at once. And then I had to go on the journey of discovery of actually writing it. But yeah, just trying to put it together in a way that really made sense to me. I mean, it's a huge learning journey for me. And I still use it. I still flip through it. And actually, after I finished the final draft, I have gone on this health journey of a different sort. And I've had to go back to the book and kind of be like, what did I write? Oh yeah. So it's a process of endless growth. Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it, that something that is so deeply personal, we write about it, and then we step away from it for a while, and we go back to it, and it really is like reading another author's work, where you have to sort of internalize it again. So,
well, it's a funny thing. Yeah, we put something in writing, and then what's the nature of the world is to change. The nature of our minds, our hearts is to change. And so, yeah, we change and the book doesn't. And interesting. But yeah, it's taught me a lot. And I think a lot of small groups have used it, and especially folks in the Dharma, to kind of come to terms with some of the emotional healing that they weren't really doing. And that's allowed them to integrate their practice, integrate their insights, spiritual insights more deeply. So yeah, it's a beautiful thing to witness.
So in your work, I'm assuming you work with students?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so in your work with them, do you use your book? Do you work with them in the context of that book? Or do you have a different approach?
I have kind of two main threads to my meditation teaching, and one is a self-compassion based thread, which is what this book is about, and the other is a nature-based thread. So I do wilderness-based retreats as well. Mm-hmm. So this book represents And the next book I'm writing is on nature and meditation. But this book is about how self-compassion, a certain type of self-compassion I describe in the book, can be used as a kind of a full process of waking up. And the common format, we do like a day and a half retreat. We'll just do intensive practice. But the spirit of the book was to create a way that someone could just do that on their own. So there's the whole middle section is several dozen meditations that you can find online, guided meditations. So you can kind of just do a retreat at home and yeah, I was kind of trying to make myself obsolete a little bit.
So I was thinking a little bit about how one gets sensitized to the natural world. I saw something, this must have been about 18 months ago. And interestingly, it was about a primary school class that was being taught out there in the Pacific Northwest, where there were multiple teachers and their students, and they took the children as part, I suppose, of a biology class or a nature class. They took them out into the woods. And it was a beautiful segment to watch, to see how their teaching was intertwined with sort of the live discovery process for these young people. And I remember thinking, would that there were such a course, such a class for children in elementary school everywhere, to learn about sort of nature and the natural world. And it sounds like that was an interest for you from early on in your life.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it obviously appeals to everyone in different ways. Some people dive into the more intellectual approach and the science-based approach to nature. But for me, it was always just more of an intuitive thing. I just love to be in the presence of these other wild beings and just kind of absorb the wisdom, sort of like in the Vajrayana or Tibetan traditions. Often there's like a transmission from one teacher to another student, and that's how I feel kind of in the natural world, especially with some more ancient places or ancient trees, and just kind of you're just receiving something, and it's an embodied experience, and it's an experience of deep interconnection, kind of trying to touch the ineffable piece that weaves us all together. So that was always my kind of just, intuitive draw on it. So often when we go out and sit in nature together, that's a big piece of it. We're just sitting in silence together in a circle, but also we're surrounded by a circle of trees often, and there's a quality of just kind of listening or just opening oneself up. There's a quality of letting go of technique and just being present for the silence, stillness, spaciousness that is our birthright. So I think kids pick that up in different ways. Yeah.
To what extent was that a part of your early Buddhist study?
It wasn't really part of any study. My early Buddhist experience was a lot of talks by my teacher and then living at retreat centers. Mm-hmm. But I practiced Zen, I practiced Tibetan, I practiced Insight. I kind of bopped around a little bit just to whatever was kind of within the range of where I was living at that time. And there's little threads, like especially at the retreat centers I lived at, which were in nature, of teachers bringing it up. But it wasn't until I got more into studying the texts, the early Pali Canon, the early teachings of the Buddha, that I kind of saw that was, that's kind of what I'm writing about now, is just how nature and contemplative practice were hand in hand in the Buddhist time, and very explicitly that way. And that now in my life, I can't quite separate them. And I'm not sure they ever were, because even the cultures back in early Buddhism were so much more interconnected with nature than we are now. And the monasteries that the Buddha set up were often on the edge of the wilderness. And many of the monks would be practicing out in the forest alone or in small groups, or even foraging for food out in the jungle, and so on. So the level of intimacy with nature was kind of part and parcel of how that whole early Pali Canon comes across. If you can kind of see that, and if you put that context in there, then it comes to life in a slightly different way, I think.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. Absolutely right about that. And your ability to bridge those different contexts, I think, is very, very important. And as you, one of the more impressive things, and there are lots of impressive things about your book, but is the ease with which you seem to write about these sort of the essential parts of these Buddhist concepts. You're not. I did not detect in your writing of this book at all that there was a particular Buddhist perspective that was driving something, was driving a concept that you advanced. That you really were looking, and again, pardon my use of this term here because you use it in a beautiful way in your book, but the heart of what you were trying to get to transcended any particular Buddhist approach to some extent. And therefore, I didn't run into a lot of jargon from one particular perspective versus another. You managed to weave together something very beautiful that I thought got to the heart essence of those concepts, those constructs, without having to rely at all on particular trappings of certain teachings.
Nice. Yeah, I've never felt confined to one tradition, definitely.
I'm just wondering if the Bodhi tree gave the Buddha transmission, and that's what started everything. I hadn't looked at it that way before. That would be interesting.
Yeah, well, he touched the earth, right? Right before he became enlightenment. That was the last thing he did.
Yeah.
And he touched the roots of the tree, and yeah, I think it's kind of a waking up together. It's the earth realizing itself as the earth, realizing itself as the earth.
How do you encounter that? And you mentioned you sort of didn't talk about techniques or practices, but when you're out in the forest with the kids, how do you welcome that in?
Well, I mean, my retreats in the forest are mainly with adults, but we usually wait till the last day, and usually I'm doing 5-day silent retreats, and then on the last day or the day before the last day, we're focusing our awareness on awareness itself. So it's a bit of a switch. Instead of just focusing awareness on the body or emotions or thoughts, turn your attention around and kind of inquire who is seeing, who is the one that is aware. And often there's a field of silence and stillness and spaciousness that opens up. And there's a recognition that people often have spontaneously, at least to some degree, that the earth, it's one answer, right? It's like, oh, who's meditating? The earth is meditating. Who's feeling sad? The earth is feeling sad. Who's wondering what I'm going to have for lunch? The earth is wondering what I'm going to have for lunch. There's sort of this recognition of the bigger system that we're a part of, and the impersonal nature of our moment-to-moment experience, the more than personal nature, I can say. And I think that is a piece of that awakening experience that the Buddha had, right? When the Buddha awakened under the Bodhi tree, he didn't wake up, right? The Buddha didn't wake up. The earth woke up. And he didn't teach for the next 45 years. The Earth taught for the next 45 years. So I think that's kind of a nice way to include yourself, but sort of expand beyond it.
Sounds like he did get some transmission. What do you think?
Oh, well, I think that was a beautiful example of what you've done throughout the book in terms of taking what appears to be a private experience, a me-only experience, a me-focused experience, and enlarging that. And you've done that beautifully in the book with the notion of compassion, what you call wholehearted compassion. And that involves compassion for self, but it also very much includes compassion for others as well. And I think that's an important part of what Mike is alluding to, I think, with the Bodhi tree and you creating opportunities for young people and probably others that you've worked with to open up to that. It's just maybe starting with self-compassion and then generalizing that more broadly. Does that ring true for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of my realization in my own practice, and then part of what I realized sharing with others, is that if we don't, well, I don't know, first or at some point along the way, develop a psychological wholeness within ourselves, it's really hard to feel connected to anything else. And self-compassion is one way, I think a very powerful way of reconnecting with all the different disenfranchised parts of ourselves so that we create a whole, a psychological whole in ourselves. And most of our psyches are pretty fractured, and that also parallels the fracturization that we see out in the world of the social atomization and then separation from nature. Inside, often we're fractured into a lot of disagreeable parts that are in conflict with one another. So self-compassion hopefully starts to piece that all back together so that we have a semblance of stability within our psychological selves. And then it's a lot easier for the mind and heart to fold back into sort of the other concentric circles of connection that that are our birthright, into human community, but also into natural community. So self-compassion feels like a doorway, a crucial doorway. It also feels like something that we always probably are going to come back to, because there's going to be some part of ourselves that gets triggered and wounded, and by a relationship we're in, by something that happens in the world, and we're going to find ourselves in a very personal form of pain. That is all enmeshed in our personal narratives from our personal history, and we need a really personal, intimate kind of self-compassion to go along with that. But as those wounds start to settle or heal or dissipate from our own care, we can open back up to that more than personal reality. So I see it more as kind of a back and forth, kind of a turning. Well, I call it in the book the turning of the wheel of healing. Sort of start in a real personal way and then expand to this more than personal way of being with ourselves, and then back again and back again until the two become just two sides of the same coin, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I've always noticed sort of these categories we create where we have someone will write a book that is about the psychology of this, or someone else will write a book about the spirituality of this. But the spiritual and the psychological, even the physical dimensions for each of us, they're not such tightly differentiated categories. And though many books are written as though those are separate fields, those are separate aspects of one's life, but they really aren't. They go together. And one of the things I most appreciated about your book, as I mentioned earlier, was that you find a language that allows you to address those different dimensions of being without feeling like you have to stay within the lane of the terminology that this discipline might use or that approach might use. And it makes your book very readable, very engaging, and frankly, just refreshing to not have to sort of be translating in one's mind. Is he talking about this, which over here is talked about like that? It's one of the really remarkable things I think about your writing.
That's great. Yeah. I think spirituality and healing need each other, and I think that's kind of the core thesis. Hard to imagine one without the other now for me.
Yes, you certainly set the bar for me. I'm going to be much less interested in books that draw those narrow disciplinary kinds of guidelines. I think going forward, I think that will be harder for me after having read your book.
Yeah, good.
It sounds like you're abandoning your academic background, Lynn. Huh?
Don't tell anyone. Please don't tell anyone that, Mike.
I was wondering. A different paragraph that you wrote sort of struck my attention, and I just sort of loved the energy behind it. Almost that it said, you say later on, I propose what may be a shift in focus, the fundamental importance of a thorough psychological healing to the progression of the spiritual path. And that really struck me. Just the word "may," that the way that sort of resonated with me is that it's sort of a critique of Buddhism, but yet Buddhism might be encompassing what you're doing anyway. Kind of just sort of like maybe Western Buddhism has sort of emasculated sort of the mystery that was always there, and you just need to sort of remind it, flesh it back out again for a Western audience, perhaps.
Yeah. I think there is some critique around the way Buddhism is presented in the West. Sometimes it is done without respect for the emotional wounding or psychological wounding that we have and the healing that's necessary. But that is starting to change. That's in my time, it was not so popular, but with my generation of teachers, there's a lot of people talking about it. So the question is, was that always part of Buddhism, or is this sort of something that only modern Westerners need? And I think that's an interesting, discussion. I think part of the answer is it's kind of a modern Western challenge that we have. Like I mentioned, the atomization of everything, the fracturization of everything that we see around us in our society. In that context, I think we just have a lot more internal schisms that need to get healed. And I think back in the Buddhist day that it wasn't the same way. Like I mentioned, there's just the connection in nature was immediate and intimate, and the sort of stratification of society, the atomization of people out of village and tribe hadn't happened yet. There was just a lot more wholeness to that world, and I'm not sure they needed quite as much emotional tending as we need now. So.
Yeah, and I remember, a lot of the old Buddhist texts seem to use a lot of nature that I think is we've lost the context for. Like even the whole metaphor of Buddhism is the finger pointing at the moon, but that's the moon. That's like the seed of traditionally the emotion and water and everything, but it's there was an intimate connection with nature and everything, like you said. Or I remembered the koan about the wild fox, where the the teacher gave the wrong explanation and had to was rebirthed 500 times as a fox. And I think, in those cultures that meant a lot more than we're sort of more distant from the fox and the moon, that's sort of those natural forces, like you said.
Yeah. Our language has changed, our metaphors have changed, and but like I said, it doesn't take a whole lot of time getting people, getting kids, getting whoever back into nature before we start to remember. And I think that's essential piece of the path at this point.
What metaphors do you think do resonate with the modern audience to tie them back in, perhaps, or in our culture?
I mean, I think the nature metaphors still do. I'm just, speaking to metaphors of like digital metaphors that we have a lot of now, technological metaphors. Like, I don't have the bandwidth for that, or, something like that. There's a lot of ways we talk about things that have been divorced, but everyone intuitively understands the moon still, I think, even, maybe they can't see the stars as well or what have you. But yeah, there's, like I think Lynn said earlier, it's, we're in a strange time, and strange, I think, is the right word, because it's like 0.001% of our human history has been, apart from nature, estranged from nature. So I just feel like we have it all in our bones. And so I love to use nature metaphors, and I think people pick up on that. And then just the relational piece, right? The Dharma of Healing is a lot about our innate relational capacity as human beings. We're just turning that relational capacity inward on ourselves. We're caring for the different parts of ourselves in ways that create wholeness and transform. And that's also inherent. That's also like an inherent technology that we have in our bones as well as mammals for millions of years. So I don't think we're too far. Yeah, I don't think we're too far astray.
Yeah, I have to also tell you that when I first saw the title of your book, the Dharma of Healing, I was really struck by that title, and it occurred to me that I cannot recall that I had ever before encountered the term Dharma with the term healing, and so that was a little thought-provoking for me about that.
Mm-hmm.
That you had put those two things together. And of course, it makes perfect sense reading your book. But this is certainly, I think we're certainly living at a time when there's a lot of need for healing. So much divisiveness in our culture, but also in the world in general. But also a lot of people working very, very hard to do what they can to bridge the gulfs and the gaps that have arisen. But we don't often think about we don't often put self-compassion and other compassion into a context, for example, that we are challenged by, at least in the United States, but in other areas of the world too. And that's in the political realm. And I hope that isn't too jarring a juxtaposition, but, as interesting as it was to think about the term healing in the context of some of the Buddhist practices that I do, when I think about it in the context of politics, that's an entirely different realm. Do you see a role for the notion of compassion in regard to, for example, political discourse?
Yeah,
is
I think
it
it's
even
essential.
possible to think about that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the disconnection, the divisiveness that we see in the political realm is just an extension of the divisiveness that we have internally, in my perspective. And when we do the self-compassion work to put ourselves back together, then we're much more able to extend compassion outward and say, oh, I actually know how hard it is to be human. I mean, you can't fully understand everyone else's experience, but you learn your essential human wounds. Like, I mean, some of my wounds are from birth trauma, from early relational experiences that so many of us have similar things. And I'm like, oh, okay, I can get you. So I can look at someone like Trump, or I can look at someone like, any sort of world leader or powerful figure that may be acting in ways that are harmful, and say, oh, I get that. I can kind of understand the trauma people go through. So, I mean, that's another reason for self-compassion, because it builds that other compassion if we do it really sincerely and we go really deeply in ourselves. But yeah, we gotta not let ourselves get spun up in the media-based divisiveness and left, right, this, that, especially with the 99% of the other people in the populace, let's say, of America. We have so much more in common than we don't. We all want so many more of the same things than want different things. There's certain issues that get conflated or inflated as being the essential things that we have to disagree about. But we want clean air, clean water. We want a safe place for our kids. We could go on lists. We want, we don't have to work 2 jobs to barely pay our mortgage, simple things. And so, yeah, we just, the media lives off of making those divisions and keeping us in fear. And we need to do that. We just have to do the opposite. We have to keep having compassion, seeing the similarities, seeing what brings us together. So, I mean, it's a little bit about that, but yeah, happy to talk about politics. I think it's important.
I heard this was a few months back now, but a woman who had been in Israel visiting a family. She was Buddhist, and she was visiting a family when the young people at the concert were shot, and everyone who could went into the safe rooms in their homes. And so she was with her friend, and they went into the safe room in their homes, and they actually heard men with guns come into the home and start to search the home. And there was just one wall that was a false door that stood, I think, between them. And she talked about how in that moment she relied so heavily on she could trust and rely on her practice, her Buddhist practice. And she consciously tried to be really in touch not only with her own fear and her own, mixture of terror and feelings at the time, but also what it was like for those on the other side of the door and the kinds of things that they might be experiencing. And I found that really interesting, that her practice at that time could be so strong and keep her so in a mode of balancing self and other in that moment, and that she was doing a practice on behalf out of concern for them as well as for herself and those she was with.
Yeah.
Those are sometimes, I think, we imagine we don't really stop to think, if we have the luxury of not facing those kinds of situations, we don't really think about how important those practices can be at those highly, highly significant points in our lives.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we practice for, just those intense moments. And laying a foundation of compassion can transform a lot of junctures in our life so that our whole life heads in a different direction. And that's a beautiful example of that. But I also want to point out that I think what is often not stated about those amazing examples is that, whether it's like Nelson Mandela or whether it's I've heard of some Tibetan monks that after being tortured by the Chinese for long periods of time come out and have compassion for their torturers. What's not often talked about is that those are not just sort of valiant heroics. Those are like what the perspective of caring for our captors or caring for our people who are causing us harm actually saves our hearts. It actually protects our hearts. And what you know intimately when you do a lot of practice is how corrosive dwelling in hatred or dwelling in othering is, and on your own heart, on your own being. And that when you're in those kind of situations, the best thing you can do is to keep orienting the mind towards compassion, towards understanding, towards intimacy, whether or not that ends up changing the other person's perspective in that moment. And sometimes it can, certainly. But that's so self-compassion and compassion for, that's what the last few chapters of the book are about, is really how the way we approach our relationships and the way we approach the world is actually another form of self-compassion. And by seeing the goodness and seeing the confusion in other people instead of judging or attacking, actually keeps our hearts pure and keeps us connected. So we don't have to pull away or fracture our perspective. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
But it's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, that's, I've carried that image with me since I heard the story. What a remarkable thing that was under those circumstances. But I think you're absolutely right.
I think another piece that people often overlook is that the people who cause harm, the people in that scenario you're describing who are killing others, are inflicting virtually irreparable damage on their own psyches. And we don't often understand. We're very obviously, quick to protect the victim and to blame the perpetrator, but we don't really understand the damage the perpetrator is doing to their own heart and mind. And for many folks, it's irreparable, meaning they're not going to have the chance, at least in this lifetime, to undo that. And they're likely going to dig themselves deeper, especially if they're not met with compassion, which most of the time there's not the capacity for people to do that. So, this was a key part of the Buddhist teaching, that your own virtue is your greatest protection. And that maybe only becomes apparent until you have gone to the depths of your own heart and mind and the pain that you can hold. So just another perspective.
Yes.
Is there a possibility that I couldn't help thinking that the people approaching the example, the woman in the house who was having compassion for the people intruding on the house with guns, that like everything is a transmission in a way, and we talked about the easy transmissions perhaps with the Bodhi tree out in nature, but even that perhaps would be the more harder transmission. But yet, if you could metabolize it or alchemize it, I think you used the word alchemize, but nevertheless, if you can alchemize that perhaps it is even, well, I'll let you take it from there. But
Well,
just the idea that somebody that lives in the inner city and doesn't have access to nature, they can still, everything, there's nature in bricks and even in automobiles, and it's harder, it's the energy is harder to alchemize, but it's all a transmission, perhaps.
yeah, I think it's a beautiful perspective. I think a core piece of what I try to help folks with is to approach all of their pain as a teacher, as a guide, and approach all of their pain internally as something that can be a doorway. And while I do wish there was a lot more equality in the world and that people were not in such dire circumstances, it's also the case that amazing transformations have happened when people in poor circumstances have used it in that way. So this is a teacher for me. This is a guide. This is I'm going to listen and be humble. And sometimes those are the most powerful people who have made it through hell and back and have been resilient. I found the resiliency, and that's kind of how the opening of the book that you started with is like these really hard realities that we have to face can also force us to dig deeper if we take it that way. And again, easier said than done. I'm not wishing poor circumstances on anyone, but it means no matter where we're at, we can turn the wheel of the Dharma.
Where should we go next, Lynn? Should we have him talk about? Should we go on a retreat with him? Nature's heart retreats.
Yeah, come on.
When's the next one? How do we sign up? I want to get some transmission from the trees.
You should. Yeah. You're welcome.
Well, Justin, is there anything that you particularly wanted to touch on today? Is there something that you feel that you would really like us to know?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest transformation comes from our own attitude and perspective. And it's kind of just the thread I was already on, really. But I just find it with myself and with a lot of people who are on retreats or working with me, that it takes often just kind of a slight redirect or reframing, and everything's a lot easier. And usually that reframe is that everything in ourselves is trying to help us somehow, that even our annoying habits or triggers and reactivity or whatever it might be, the thing we think is blocking what we want is often there to help us somehow. And when we have a big moment of anger or we're triggered, we can say, thank you for trying to help me. Thank you for caring about me so much. We can say that to our own anger in our bodies. And that's often the beginning of a transformation. The anger reveals sadness underneath. Yeah, we actually did really care about that, the thing we're trying to protect or the thing we lost. And then we can say to that sadness, I care about you too. And often that sadness processes and it leaves this experience of tenderness or vulnerability, this openness. And that's our doorway to connection, right? So then we can be with that tenderness, and that can actually transform into joy and ease or equanimity. So you can kind of see just from anger to sadness to vulnerability to equanimity, we can do this inner transformation, emotion by emotion, moment by moment, by just redirecting our attention, using kindness, curiosity, gratitude, oriented towards whatever internally challenging experience we have. And I think it just reminds, people are heartened by that, because it reminds us of our own goodness, reminds us that we don't have to manufacture or become something different than what we are, that actually our own open hearts are just underneath our layers of reactivity. And they're just waiting there to be reconnected with. And our own open hearts are then the doorway to connection to everything else. So we don't need to go to some spiritual state that's other than where we are. We just have to kind of do the uncovering. And that happens, I think, most readily through these heart qualities, these healing emotions, curiosity, gratitude, kindness. So I think that's often the biggest piece for folks that they're missing on their spiritual journeys. And sometimes it's a big path because they have a lot of conditioning of self-criticism. But we can even turn to that, right? Those self-critical voices, and say, thank you for trying to protect me. Thank you for trying to help me, right? Our self-criticism is trying to keep us in line so we don't get in trouble, so we don't get hurt, But it's just compassion disguised. So that becomes the bigger realization then, that everything in our own hearts and minds is actually based in love and care. It might be a selfish care sometimes, or obsessive care, or some sort of distorted care, but it's based in that. So we start to remember the goodness of our own hearts, not the original sin, but the original goodness of our own hearts. And we see a lot more possibility in others and in the world from that place. So a little thing turning towards ourselves with kindness can go a long way. So hopefully that's something that's come through in this conversation.
And if people are interested in joining you on retreat or connecting with you, where would be a good place to connect with you at?
Yeah, the easiest thing is just to go on my website, justinmichelsondharma.com, and you can see what I have for offerings on there, or you can just send me an email. There's a link to the book too, if you want to get that on any major platform. I have some social media presence as well on Facebook and Instagram, but website's probably the best place.
Is there a release date for your new book coming out? I mean, the one on nature?
No, and there is not yet.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm needing to spend a little more time with this first book, and then hopefully Shambala will publish another one for me.
Sounds good. Sounds like a good idea. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for.
I really I really enjoyed this, and I wish you the best of luck. And let us know when the next book comes out, and we'd love to have you on again.
Yeah.
Indeed. Yes, indeed. This was great.
Thank you.
Lynn and I need to take a road trip out to Oregon or Costa Rica. Where else are you lurking about these days?
Oregon's the main spot. Yeah, come on out. Yeah, the forests of the Northwest are very impressive and powerful, and they should be protected. So it's good that book's there.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Justin.
Yes, thank you. It was wonderful to meet you.
Yeah, good to meet you too.